I stopped the trial, and I told my lawyer that I wanted to change my plea. And he looks at me, and he tells me to hold on for a minute, and I sit there, and I nudge him again. I said, I want to change my plea. When he makes that announcement, I hear two screams. I hear the family scream, and I hear my family scream. My family screaming, what are you doing? Are you crazy? You're tripping. But I had peace. If I ever could describe the peace that surpasses all understanding, I had it that day.
In this episode, I get to interview Calvin Green. He's been out a few months after serving 25 on a 50-year sentence. I met him back in 2011 when I was an adjunct instructor for a 4-year college and prison seminary program, and I haven't seen him for about 6 years. He paroled out here to Houston, and so I met up with him to talk about what he's been up to since he's been out and what his plans are for the future. This is just part one of a 2-part episode. Calvin has a very unique story. And if hearing stories like his are valuable to you, maybe because you have a loved one incarcerated or you are formerly incarcerated, please subscribe to the channel. If you're watching this right now, it means I have less than 1,000 subscribers, and that's my goal for this year. So if you want to hear content like this, please subscribe to the channel, share it with people who you think need to hear it, and let me know what you want to hear in the future. Thanks. Are you actually from Houston?
No.
Where are you from?
No, I'm from Orange, Texas.
Orange. Oh, that's why you were out there earlier.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Orange, Texas.
So what was it like then growing up? This is UGK is out there.
The UGK, Port Arthur in the
Bundy,
Triangle.
Yeah.
And I don't know, growing up for me, my dad, when I was younger, my dad was in prison. So my mom pretty much, for the most part, growing up had to raise 4 boys by herself, and so she worked nights, and so that left us by ourselves a lot at night. Me being the youngest, I have 3 other siblings, all boys, and so it was challenging, especially we growed up in Arthur Robinson Projects, which was a rough part of town. And so there was always the violence, always the drugs, which in those neighborhoods is pretty prevalent. But it was rough, especially being a baby. So you always want to follow the older brother. So it's kind of like you're always looking for your identity in your older siblings. And so for me, it was challenging, I would say. But we were family. That's one of the things that my mom always instilled in us, that we have each other. And so I can remember it was times where I would have to be the one to knock on the door and ask for a cup of sugar. Or I would have to be the one, hey, can we borrow some eggs? Yeah. And so the little brother always got that, but I was always the one that was protected by my older siblings. And so just looking back, and I can remember it was times where, I miss my dad. It's funny because I can remember when my dad first got out. I was out playing, and I ran in the house as normal and went up to use the restroom, and the light was off. And so I hear somebody's in the bathtub. So I'm frozen. So I run out there and I'm screaming, "Mom, there's a man in our bathroom." And I hear this voice, and he says, "I'm your dad, I'm home." And instantly, I don't know what it was, but I knew it was him, and I ran and got my brothers, and he sat us all down. And he told us, he said, "I'll never leave you guys again," And so from that moment on, he became a living example of somebody who made mistakes earlier in life, but built from those mistakes. And he taught us the value of working. But by that time, I had already developed this attitude where I knew that the kids at school were better dressed than me, and so some of the influence that he had wasn't more overpowering than the guys who were in my neighborhood.
Right.
And so at that time, I started desiring the finer things in life, or just name brand clothes, materialistic, wanting to fit in. Looking back, at an early age, I developed a sense of codependency. I wanted people to like me. I wanted to be somebody in my neighborhood. And so that led me to hang around the wrong people, going to the wrong places and doing the wrong things. But overall, as much as my mom tried, and then when my dad came, they tried to instill in us a sense of godly fear. Going to church, it became routine because it was just you go because they say go.
Yeah.
And so
That's about what it was for me.
yeah, and so I went. We all went until we got old enough to say I don't want to go, and so we kind of left those roots there. But she did her very best. My dad, like I said, he would tell us to go, but he wouldn't go, and so it was just us and our mom. And I can remember going to church and just like, man, we can't wait till this is over. And so it was always that. But we never lacked anything. My dad, like I said, once he got out of prison, he showed us because he didn't go back to selling drugs. My dad went to work. I would watch him come home from work, and he would get paid on a Friday, and by Wednesday, he was going to borrow money to make it to the next week because the jobs that he had didn't provide enough, but they provided enough to keep him from going to do other things.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty much a lifestyle. One of the things I remembered is it was funny because I don't know, I'm telling my age here, but Wieners used to do the layaway thing.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't like that because my mom would be like, we're going school shopping. And so I would go try on all these clothes, and I'm thinking I'm going to take them home with me.
You got to wait till Christmas.
Yeah, and the lady puts them behind the counter, and I'm like, well, why we can't take the clothes? Well, I can't afford them right now. They're on layaway.
Yeah.
And then the kid, I didn't understand it. I just knew that I didn't have the school clothes, And so that was one of the things of not being content, as a young child, and feeling like I was less fortunate than other kids. And so, of course, growing up in that environment, the older guys are always telling you, hey, man, you got to get it how you live, so to speak. And you seeing what they having, but not understanding the consequences that come with that type of lifestyle, the full consequences of it. And so all you thinking is school clothes and being able to take care of myself.
Yeah.
And so that pretty much led me into the lifestyle that I started living as a youngster. I was 24 years old when I got sentenced to 50 years in Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I tell you, it was a shock because the reality of the length of the sentence didn't really sink in until about 12 years after doing it, being in it. But initially, man, I was scared to death, because I had never been to prison before. This is my first time ever being convicted and going to prison. I'd been arrested 3 times prior to this one. And each time it was a misdemeanor and I was out. It was like the next day.
Yeah.
And so this was actually the first time that I was actually convicted of something of this magnitude, and that was going to land me in prison for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And so having heard all the stories, it was real scary, because you don't know what to expect.
What was your dad's response? Having had that experience before?
Oh, man, he was heartbroken. My dad was heartbroken. My mom was heartbroken. Sometimes I think that it had an effect on her health. I know it stressed them out real bad because their youngest child was sentenced to so much time. It affected all of my family, not just my immediate household, but all my family, my cousins, everybody was affected in some shape, form, or fashion. And that's the reality of it. When you sit down, you realize that it doesn't just affect you when you do time or just your household. It affects your family. and so for my family, it affected them all.
Were your other siblings, were they involved in crime and running the streets?
Well, me being the youngest, the brother that's next to me, he had run-ins with the law. But my two older brothers, oh no, my brother Don, no, he was the furthest thing from the law.
Yeah.
And my brother Harold, the same way. Here's a guy who was a blue chip All-American, football star, track star, well known in the athletic world. And it that's why when you look back, you're like, how can all of us be raised in the same household, but each, we all went in different paths, so to speak, and so that's an attest to the choices that I made early in life, that affected me at 24 years old, or even starting from a young age, to make those type of decisions that would lead me down the path that I chose to take, those decisions that I made. And so at 24, on my way to diagnostics in 1995, it was really scary.
I bet.
And
that was the mid-90s.
Yeah, and it was rocking and rolling, in the mid-90s. And so my thing was, even before I even left the county, I had an encounter with God. God had changed my life, before I even got on this first chain bus. And so it was such a traumatic experience that a lot of people were shocked, that, wow, this has happened to him. God has touched his life, leading up to the situation in the courtroom, because I changed my plea in open court. I stopped the trial, and I told my lawyer that I wanted to change my plea. And it was really, I don't know, if I ever could describe the peace that surpasses all understanding, I had it that day.
In the courtroom? In
the courtroom, because while the judge was talking and my lawyer and everything is going on, I hear this voice, and I know who it is. And he tells me, "Do you trust me?" And I said, "Yeah, I trust you." But my first question was, what about my family? What about my kids? And he said, "I'll take care of your kids." I said, "Okay." And I nudge my lawyer, and I tell my lawyer I want to change my plea. He looks at me, and he tells me to hold on for a minute. And I sit there, and I nudge him again. I said, "I want to change my plea." So he calls for a recess, and he says, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, I'm sure." And we go back in, he talks to the judge, and the judge addresses the court. Well, when he makes that announcement, I hear two screams. I hear the family scream, and I hear my family scream. And my family screaming, "What are you doing? Are you crazy? You're tripping." But I had peace. I had peace. And so when everything was over, I had one aunt who came up to me, and she said, "I knew that if God had touched your life like you said he did, you wouldn't allow this to go on." And so from that moment on, my walk with God went to whole new levels. But I still had to face the sentencing, and I still had to face that I was going to prison, but I just didn't know how long I was going to go. But one of the things that I was confident in was the scriptures, because I was scared, and I was asking God, I said, well, how am I going to know my brothers when I get down there? Because people are telling me this, they're telling me, you're going to have to get involved with somebody. You're going to have to ride with somebody. You're going to have to click up with somebody. And I'm thinking, well, I'm a Christian, and if I don't, and it was like, well, that doesn't matter. You still have to rep it. I'm like, no, I'm a Christian. And so I was asking God, how am I going to know my brothers? And he said, you'll know them by their fruit. And so I just sat back and I began to look for the guys who were fruit bearers. I watched them, watched the guys who had the prayer circles. I watched the guys who not only left the prayer circle, but lived out those virtues that Christians should have. and so I began to gravitate towards those guys. And those guys began to build a shield, so to speak, of brotherhood, who were loving Christian guys who were doing time, and they began to teach me how to do time. Mind your own business. We have church on this night. We have Bible study on this night. Get involved with the things that are going on spiritually on the unit. And so I started getting involved with that. Those older Christian guys, so to speak, took me under their wing and discipled me, and shared the word of God with me and gave me some type of responsibility and some type of purpose while I was in there. And it was challenging, most definitely, because now I'm away from family. I don't know when I'm going to see them again. When they're telling you your parole date in 1995 or 7 is 2020.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, what does that mean? 2020. That doesn't even
register.
So you dive wholeheartedly. For me, I dove wholeheartedly to the things of God. I as much time as I could, I dedicated to being a productive citizen in my community. I knew that was going to be my community for a long time. If by some miracle I made it out, I'm here. And so I have to learn how to survive here and be a productive citizen in this community. And it was one day at a time. It was one unit at a time. They sent me. I got classified, and they sent me to the John B. Connally Unit. Mm. And when I went to diagnostics, and the guy was telling me, he said, and everybody's going in this room, and they're coming out, and we're coming out, and they're like, oh, I'm going here, I'm going here, I'm going here. And so the guy says, John B. Connally. And so I'm like, he said, do you have any questions? I'm like, no. And he said, okay, out the door. And so I go out and I'm telling these guys, hey, man, where's John B. Connally? And the guy looks at me and he said,
down south.
And he told me, he said, you might as well learn Spanish now. And he said, there's a lot of killing going on over there. It's a young gladiator rowdy form.
Yeah.
And man, I'm going to tell you, I got on a bus with a guy who was, I think he was a Crip. And we were handcuffed together. And all the way there, I'm just sharing scripture with him. And this guy, right before we get, he said, man, I'm in trouble. I'm like, well, what's the problem? He said, I'm going to this forum and it's a gang and I know I'm this. And I asked him, I said, do you want to get out of that? And he said, yeah, but I said, no buts. Do you want to get out? And he said, yeah. And I said, you realize that you're in trouble, right? And he was like, yeah. And I said, what if I told you was in trouble with God? And he's sitting there and he's like, well, what do you mean? And I started sharing with him about sin and how God looks on sin. And I said, he can give you a new start. I said, he can protect you if you trust him. And right then and there, hey, man, pray for me. Pray with me. And so I got an opportunity. I'm talking about before I even got off the bus. But what was really scary was when we pulled up to the back of the unit, there's all this riot gear laying out. and I'm telling them, I said, just trust God. Just trust God. I don't know what happened. I trusted God that he trusted God,
Yeah.
But we end up separating, and it was I didn't have where people come up to you and they just, how they say they do a heart check.
Yeah.
I didn't run into that, because I thank God for his hedge of protection, but my character was consistent with who I said I was and who I represented. And in those days, even now, if you say you're Christian, then they want to see it.
Yeah.
If you're about that life, they want to see you about that life. And so there had to be some consistency in my walk with God. And that's what it was. I earned their respect. I earned the credibility of being called a man of God. I earned that with those guys. And everywhere I went, God had always given me favor, for one, because I had done so much time. And for two, because I represented what I said I was. I lived it out. And so I became somewhat of a mediator between the guys who were we were Christians, and the gang members in our dorm or in our tank, wherever, depending on whatever unit I was on. And so using that influence to just be a peacemaker. You know, one of the things I loved about scripture says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. And so wherever I went, I just tried to be a peacemaker, you know. And so after leaving the holiday unit in 97, some of the Connally Unit, like I mentioned, and the initial shock of being in that environment is like going to another country. It's another culture. Every prison is prison, but every prison has its own culture.
Yeah.
And so Connally, predominantly Hispanic, and so you had to deal with all the different gangs in there, but yet find your place within that. And one of the things I love, and looking back in hindsight, one of the things about being a Christian is that whatever culture we were in, we were known.
Yeah.
And that I love that, because God is like, he automatically has that respect, you know. And so the time at Connally was challenging, because you got to remember, I was there during the whole Connally 7 thing.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and so
I was locked up during that time too, but you was right there.
Yeah, and it was like, it was so much going on at that time that was a highlight, but there were a whole lot of other things going on. There was a whole lot of other violence going on. There were gang wars jumping off. There were gangs that were purging members who wasn't living up to what they said they were. And so you had riots jumping off. And one day I can remember plainly, we were in a day room, and I was cool with all these guys. You know, it didn't matter, Hispanic, black, you name it. White, I was cool. I knew everybody. And so that particular day, a guy comes and tells me, he said, hey, man, you might want to tell your friend to leave because it's finna go down. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, hey, man, you might want to leave. Let me go get a shower. And because when that happens, you know what's going to happen. And so I'm in the shower and I'm thinking, maybe I can stop it. Maybe I can say something to somebody. And as soon as I come out the shower, it's like everything's in slow motion. And it just jumped off. I'm talking about guys are fighting everywhere. So I'm coming downstairs, and right in front of me, this guy gets hit in the head with a fan motor. And when I'm talking about, it was like a shotgun blast went off and blood went everywhere. And so 2 minutes ago, these guys were sitting down, talking and playing dominoes and drinking with each other. Now it's an all-out riot. And so in these riots, it doesn't matter what gang you're in, you come together with your race. And so it's a race riot between blacks and Hispanics. And so I'm coming down the stairs and I'm looking at all this, and it's 3 more other guys, and we're standing over here in the shower area. And we're just watching this, and we're like, man, this is crazy. And it goes on for, it seems like, forever. Well, when everything calmed down, I just went and stood by my door, my cell door. And the officer, they come in and they're screaming, everybody down, everybody down. And I'm just standing by my door. And the officer walks up to me and he does this. And he tells the picket officer to roll my door, and he puts me in the cell. And I go in and I'm looking outside the cell. I'm like, man. And I'm thinking to myself, I said, Lord, that could have easily been a riot case for me, because everybody in that day room. But here's the thing. When I got out the cell, we did a 30-day lockdown. No, we did 89 days for that. We did 89 days for that.
I don't think I ever did more than 3 weeks.
89. When I got out that cell and looked at the door, at my door, it was a silhouette of blood all around me and not a drop on me.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, Lord, did you stand an angel in front of me? You know, because it should have been on. But that's what the officer was looking for. When he didn't see nothing on me.
Yeah.
And so he was like, no, put him in.
Yeah.
You know, that's just a favor of God. That was a traumatic experience for me.
I would say so.
Really, because I know it heightened a sense of how serious things is, but also how much I needed God's protection. Even when I didn't acknowledge it, the reality was that He was protecting me. He was keeping me, and it's grace, even when you don't ask, I'm protecting you. So that was pretty challenging. But with the system, getting the jobs, just finding a job and working and being consistent there and realizing that your character speaks for itself.
Yeah.
And I wanted to display that type of character. Hadn't always been a model inmate, because I had my challenges.
Yeah.
And those were some of the things that I worked through, and asking God, because once again, that old behavior, you feel the sense of, well, I need to get this, or I want to get this. And so you start compromising, in your walk. And so I remember one time they had me working in SEG. And this was funny because I'm working at SEG, and the first thing you don't traffic and trade in SEG. And so I get in SEG and I'm sitting there and people are like, hey, pass this, pass this, pass this. And I'm looking at my shelf and I don't got no hygiene. So I'm like, I need some hygiene, And so I started traffic and trading. Well, I'm sitting on a trash can one day and I prayed just a simple prayer. And I said, God, if you bless me with some money, I said, I'll stop traffic and trading. I won't do it anymore. And God has a way of showing you that you lie to yourself. And I get in that night and there's a letter from my mom. And she said, well, baby, we don't have much money, but I sent you $50. And I said, oh, you sent me $50. I remember that prayer. Oh. I said, okay, God, let me just finish what I'm doing and then I'll stop. But He showed me then, I just wanted to show you that you lie to yourself.
I'm over here dripping. I don't know why I didn't wear a hat. I thought about it too. Houston, I hope them screaming kids ain't gonna mess stuff up. Long sentence prison. Man.
She said, so where were you compared to this place? Man, you are sweating profusely.
Yeah. So how old were you? I'm sorry. That motorcycle. One more time. So how old were you when you...
Right on.
Maybe this was such a great idea. I didn't know what else to do. Had you had a bunch of run-ins with the law at all? Or? Let me ask you one more time. Had you had any run-ins with the law? I didn't take into account
the crickets, the motorcycles,
locusts, cicadas. Man.
Bro, they're not gonna stop.
They're not gonna stop. Yeah, they ain't gonna stop. There's no way I can block it. Let's just work with it from there. Okay, you'll know them by their fruit. Go.
And so
please leave your message
between sisterhood there.
Yeah.
Well, a drag strip. Brandon got it. Brandon got it.
Where's my rag go?
You had it in your... What you did with it?
Man, it's gone.
Look in your pocket, Brandon.
Oh. That's horrible. That's like... All the audio might be ruined, but I'm gonna try and edit stuff out.
Try to get as much as you can. Pull a ham.
Exactly. This is when I wish him and Robert was helping me out.
Rob, oh man, I forgot about Rob.
Franz.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think we're gonna make it.
we got this for us.